Thank you, Ian, for joining. It's my pleasure to introduce Ian Troup, who will be talking to us today about catching difficult fish, obviously something that we all aspire to do at some point in our angling careers. So for those of you that may not know Ian, he's been a fishing guide for over 20 years and competing internationally for Team Canada for almost as long. A firm believer that you never stop learning. Ian has had the opportunity to learn from multiple world champions and guiding mentorship from the late Ian Colin James. And we just found out that Bryce has a relation to him. So great to have you, Bryce. Ian's true passion is education and passing along tips and techniques to catch more fish. He's a certified casting instructor and guides across Southern Ontario, along with being on the pro staff of the Franklin Club and the Caledon Mountain Trout Club. So thanks, Ian. I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, it's good to be here. And for those, nice to see some familiar faces. And, it's getting into the winter season. We're starting to Zoom, so it's always kind of exciting, but sad at the same time. But lots of fish still to be caught. So I'm going to talk about catching difficult fish. For me, let's keep it an interactive session. I'm not doing presentations. I'm just going to talk about some things I know. You probably all know the same things, but I think I've condensed it through, and feel free to interrupt me. Let's have a conversation about it. I'll just start with, I was thinking about this. So we'll have the interactive session here. So what is a difficult fish? I was thinking I said it's probably one we can't catch. But I think what are the ones that really drive it? Just a couple things that we'll cover today that, how to deal with, different ways to deal with fishing pressure. So I think, you think about the credit, we were talking about the credits. Sometimes, heavily pressured rivers can have the fish behavior change. They're feeding on a specific food source. I think that sometimes we over skew that in fly fishing, but there are times when they are just dialed in on something. And if you can't figure out the right, either presentation or fly, you're probably in trouble. Just difficult conditions. Like last steelhead, the barometric pressure is all over the place, and they're just dour or something like that. And I kind of pause there. Anything else that comes to mind when we think about difficult fish, or how you view a difficult fish? And I am skewing trout today, so if you ask me, smallmouth can be extremely difficult as well. But I'll probably lean a lot of these tactics towards trout. But anything else come to mind for everybody when we talk about difficult fish, or how they view difficult fish?
You're in busy water and somebody's right in front of you.
Say again, Jane?
You're in busy water and you end up fishing right behind somebody.
Yeah.
Ian, how about when fish know you're there or they see you?
Yeah.
How important is that, and what's the impact realistic?
Yeah. Okay. I'll cover that too.
Yeah, I was gonna say, just generally pressured fish. I think rivers that are pressured fish behave differently, and I think the other one that can often be extremely difficult. And I don't know if you said this, Ian. Sorry if I missed it, but super clear water, low clear water, just generally makes things harder, no matter where you are.
Yep, and add to that sun, all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
So I mean, here across the board, a couple things I've picked up through guiding for sure, but I think that when I pick up even more is competitive fishing. We said fishing behind someone. Nothing is worse than fishing behind like a multiple world champion or something like that. There's 5 days in the world championships. I can tell you by day 5, you'll see the numbers drop from maybe 40 was winning a river down to like 5. So you really learn, okay, it does get really difficult, but there's ways to actually catch them, and you learn different ways to kind of approach it. So I want to make sure we cover all that stuff. So if I don't, just interrupt me and say, hey, what about this? And let's, use examples and things along those lines. So the number one, I think we hit it, like if you said the number one reason I think people have, have trouble catching difficult fish, or whatever you want to call it like that, is they actually spook them in the first place. So I'm going to start with a lot of fundamentals that make sense to me, but I can tell you from experience that a fish is exponentially harder to catch once it's kind of weary or it thinks you're there. So I think Marco, you asked me if a fish sees you, it's bad. It's not good. And it just makes it a lot harder. So what I like to try to do is, number one, put the odds in your favor by not spooking them. Now, you can still catch them. It just gets harder. So a lot of times when we're trying to catch fish, we've actually spooked them, to be honest. So here's like just a couple things I think about, or I see a lot of is, a real basic one is you walk up to the river with your rod tip out, and you put your rod tip over the river. So a lot of people don't pay attention to where their rod tip is, and it can relate to water conditions. But if it's low, clear water, or you come walking up to a river, don't just put a shadow across the bank. I think we've all seen the fish where a bird flies over and it heads for cover. And a lot of times, they may not stop feeding, but they're a lot harder to catch. So you've already just put yourself behind the 8-ball. A lot of people don't pay attention to heavy walking on the bank too. So I'll kind of point to fishing competitions, watching the Spanish and the French. They stay way back and they approach the river on the bank very carefully, and they actually try to stay out of the water almost all the time on a river, obviously. But they very rarely wade. They take spooking fish, and that's why they catch a lot of fish, is they focus a lot on not spooking them out of the gate. The next is spikes or no spikes. So that's a safety issue versus the other. So if you're wading around with spikes, one of my friends in Spain says you sound like a horse, but then you also don't want to slip. But if you do have spikes on, you think that grinding sound you make under the water, it transmits a lot through to the fish. So, the top guys really like they used to like felt, but felt's a little bad for, moving sometimes diseases around a river. So the rubber are okay, but they can slip. And then some of that new Sims, whatever that little spongy stuff they're using, kind of a new version of felt, is pretty good. But I will balance spikes for safety. But if I'm using spikes, how many times you think about you grind over a rock or something like that, you've just made the fish tougher to catch for sure. Judging your distance in the water type is another one, just from an approach perspective. And if I said one thing I've learned the most in the last 5 years that's made a difference is I fish a lot farther away than I used to, even in faster water. So you can get close to them. Yeah, you can catch a lot of fish, but when the fish get difficult, so we said pressured fish, things along those lines. If you're fishing behind someone, fine and far off is usually a good way to think about it, or change your fishing distance. So if you fish, whatever you're doing, nymphing, dry fly, whatever, maybe try being 3 feet back more than you were before. If you can get used to it, just a little bit more distance. Now, I'm all one for get as close to the fish as you can. It's a lot of benefits getting close to the fish. I'm not saying be miles away, but it can make a difference if you just add a couple of feet distance, especially when you think it's difficult fishing. So yeah, we're not, the fishing is tough. We know it's pressured water. The fish are going to be in different places. We'll talk about that as well. But I'm going to fish about 2 feet farther away than I normally do. Just kind of general approach things. Hats are really good for keeping the sun under your face, but I don't like white ones, yellow ones. Orange ones are okay when the leaves are changing, but why hat? You don't need some crazy camo hat, but it is the top part of sticking out of when you walk around, and you definitely don't want something that catches a lot of attention, blending in as well. So again, you don't have to go full face paint camo, although it's kind of fun to you want space on the credit, go in full camo face paint, but blending in can make a difference. But more important than that is lowering your profile. So I don't think enough people pay attention to their profile. So I'm pretty tall, 6'2", and if we're just taking a knee, or making sure you've got a tree behind you, or how much time do you actually think of the fish. I think they might not trees behind you and you're kind of standing, but if you're on a smooth, open river and you're the only thing standing up there moving around, they can see you. So, by taking a knee or trying to lower your profile or find a bush and kneel in front of that, we haven't made a cast yet. We're just making sure we're not spooking the fish to make it a lot harder for us to catch, because right out of the gate we've just made it 10 times harder than we normally would. I like the comment from Kevin Van Dam, the bass fisherman, who says smooth is fast. You can have the best camo all you want. If you're moving it aggressively, you will spook fish. So just think about your own fishing. How often are you smooth? And I think we've all seen those really good anglers that look just smooth out there. They catch more fish because it's a movement that is more natural, not this jerking a rod, ripping it around the river and things along those lines. So that's another one I would pay attention to for sure. And then the last thing, kind of on general approach, is I think you've seen me before when I showed my vest. I hate things that catch light. Like you leave the gold watch at home, the nippers that glare, nothing flashy. So if you can have things, it doesn't have, like, blacked out, or I put tape on, I go over the top on that. But if that sun, that little glint of sun, and I'm moving, it's just something that potentially could make a fish a lot more difficult to catch. So these are just kind of the fundamentals. We haven't really done anything. This is how we're actually dressing to go fishing and or behaving while we're in the water. So we'll go with kind of the pressured fish, right? So if there's, having been with kind of some of the best guys in the world who can catch fish behind you, and you're like, how are you doing it? Most of the time, it's not the fly, but there is a time when it is the fly. I think we all know this. It's the presentation, right? So, like the first thing is, what type of water are you in, right? So, the type of water will dictate a lot of times your presentation, and little things can make a big difference. So in flat water, do you ever think about the size of your bead? So we think about the size of the bead by the sink rate, but that plop going in the water can make a huge difference. So one way to catch difficult fish is to actually think about the actual plop going in. So sometimes a bigger bead can make it can be an attraction, and then too big and it kind of blows the whole thing up. But you can actually generate fish to actually take your fly, especially like with a nymph, by going, okay, this is actually medium fast water. I'm actually going to use that sound, that plop of the bead going in, and be ready by turning over the flies. Sometimes when you make that cast, you get a quick bite and you miss it. A lot of times they'll do a reaction to it. And the other one would be, if you can see the fish, if you actually plop the fly behind it, it'll turn around and take it. It's a reaction bite. So I've caught quite a few fish in competition that you could sight fish. I couldn't get them to take a nicely drifted little nymph, doing everything right, go back, take a weighted fly, plop it behind its, just in its peripheral. They'll hear the plop, then they'll just turn around and take it. So you're using a genetic response to a sound to make it actually take. And that is surprising how many times that can work. So a lot of people don't do that, that's a little bit of a sight fishing one, but don't forget about the plop. Like fish the plop would be one for me on the presentation side that not everybody does. The other question you should ask yourself when it comes to presentation is what are the fish conditioned to? I think that's a Joe Humphreys line, and I think it's one of the best lines going, is to ask yourself straight up, what are the fish conditioned to? So on the Grand, they see hatches on certain, they're conditioned to maybe certain types of flow of water, so the water's changed or not. Also, when somebody said it's really skinny water, well, are the fish conditioned to it right now, or is it the first time it's happened? Is the water temperature the same? So if you think about what they're conditioned to, it gives you a little bit more comfort level. Like the credit is interesting because it gets a lot of traffic. So I would say, they're conditioned to people wading through here, but the trout don't like it. The Grand on the other side is you can, I don't worry as much people fishing through something, because maybe it's because they're stock fish or whatever the reason. They seem more conditioned to the fishing pressure. Now, I have not been able to figure out the credit or those fish are going to get conditioned to it because you got to eat sometime and they're seeing more fishing pressure. If you are fishing in a river that they've never seen, it's very low fishing pressure and you're fishing behind 3 people, well, those fish are probably spooked for a lot longer. They may not reset as fast, as an example. So in my head, I'm going, okay, is this a busy river? Are they conditioned to this? Or is this out? It'll help adapt my approach because, again, we're talking about difficult fish, not catching av fish. These are the things I think about. If you do have pressure, something from competitions, is the fish go into really, really weird places. So I know from people who fish the credit a lot, they're picking their biggest fish out of super skinny, shallow water, places a trout's not supposed to be. So again, what are they conditioned to? They're not conditioned to a high amount of pressure. We learn it from competitions. You start putting your flies in the weirdest spots. Another one from competitions is, I can see where everybody wades up this side. Well, maybe go up the other side because the fish have been pushed over there or something along those lines. You actually start thinking completely different in a heavily pressured water situation. In competitions, we're constantly doing, okay, so fish would normally be here. Everybody's fished through this side. They'd probably skip it. They've been pushed over to some weird spot in a little corner. You find them, you light them up. They're not that difficult. There actually was no fish around. So that's a tip for pressured water, is to kind of take what throw it out and go, okay, where could fish be pressured into? Where might they go? It happens on the Grand all the time. Like the big fish just move into weird spots just because they're not even spooked as much as they're sick of people walking around where they are. And then the other one is, what are they conditioned to fly-wise? This is pressured water. Everybody using this, I love hare's ears, pheasant tails, all that stuff. They've seen, all of those. Well, what's something either subtly different about that, or more bland, or something different, or stupid big, or stupid small? So the other one I would say is big changes. So if because you're who's fishing, it amazes me. We've all done it. You put in, the streamers have gone kind of, we've got the streamer master on here. They're pulling the big streamers. That used to be outlandish 10, 15 years ago. Everything we fished was little tiny streamers. Then the big streamers came around. And what got really good after the big streamers came around? Little streamers. Because they get tired of seeing those. But drift, the mop fly. Everybody thought that was the stupidest thing you've ever seen until everybody could mop it up. Why? The fish hadn't seen it. Right, but then they see a bunch of mop flies and something else works better. But I find with a lot of the top anglers in the world, they don't do subtle changes. It's not like, I'm going to do a subtle shade of olive. They'll go to, I'm fishing a size 18 nymph. Let me put a giant fly through there, like a size 8 or something like that. Right. So, and what surprises me is they'll do it with dry flies. Okay, they're eating 22s. They put a size 4 stimulator on or something like that. So they're going, well, I've caught all the ones that are going to eat the little ones. Let me try something radically different. And that's an interesting one as it relates to doing things outside of the box. I'll talk a little bit more. I've got a couple things written down on that, you can strip dry flies, stuff like that. But when it comes to flies, and the present on, and I love my standard flies. I would tell anybody, hare's ear and pheasant tail is all you need, but don't be afraid of trying. Maybe it's maybe it's just a way bigger or a way smaller one. We tend to skew smaller as the fish get more difficult, which is a pretty good plan, as is the standards. Get your tippet lighter, get your flies smaller, but there's a point of no return where, okay, I'm on a size 22 and I'm on 9x tippet. I'm still not catching anything. I should probably do something different, right? And so, again, that's a difficult fish situation. There's so many different ones, but the one takeaway on that would be, don't be afraid of big dramatic changes in actual fly size. When it comes to beads, if you want the standard from the checks, they would say it goes in this order: silver first, then you go to copper, then you go to black nickel. So so if you've gone through and Silver is considered the most attractive of the normal. I'm not talking like fluorescent beads. So silver is your most aggressive. So if you've been doing really well in a silver nymph and it stops working and you're like, the fish got really difficult, try a copper. Okay, I was catching a few on the copper, it got stopped working, try a black nickel. I love pink bead hairs here. It's a light pink. I would put that pink between copper and black nickel. Like it would go silver, copper, pink bead, then black nickel. Pink bead is pretty subtle and they like whatever that flash is. So that, bead color can make a huge difference.
Do you go for those matte pink beads or the shiny fluorescent ones?
The matte, they're almost like a rose pinky, like I also think Ian would have loved those ones when they were around because they're actually really subtle. Like when you go in the water, and I've been all over the world with those flies, they work. Like it's something about that pink color. I mean, in Pennsylvania, fish with George Daniel, Pat Weiss, all those guys, those are difficult fish. They love a pink bead. They just do. And I think it's because it's actually pretty subtle. So, and again, it's just taking things that that work and just having a little bit different. I know there's people here who fish the credit, a lot, and I won't name names, but one Frenchie, like, oh, I just had this collar on it, and it was out fishing like the regular Frenchie, just completely different because same fly, one little hot spot, right? And then you could have said the fish were uncatchable. You just, that's one where the fly actually made a difference, but it makes sense to me. You went, okay, I didn't take my blend, I'm gonna put a hot spot on it. No hot spot. That's kind of regular fishing. But once I'm going, okay, they're not eating a pheasant tail, not eating a hare's ear. Okay, I gotta try something. I'm gonna jig a big streamer through here or something. Let me see if that'll work. Okay, that's not working. Let me try something dramatic. Okay, I'm gonna start stripping a dry fly. That's a very, very good one, by the way, for catching difficult fish. So if you want like a back pocket way to catch a lot of trout, strip a dry fly. Not many people do it. And the way you do it is you cast kind of 45-degree downstream. Give it you'll get a bit of a dead drift, and then just strip it, and they'll come. Like you can have fish that will not move, especially a brown trout. They are just genetically programmed to chase it. I've caught more difficult fish stripping a dry fly than probably anything else. Like if you really had to get at, with browns, we've all tried the jingling it. Just strip it. There's a Czech fly called Rockera or something. I think it's Czech for rock chick. It's just a palmered. If you look it up, I think Folding Mills putting it out now through what's his name, Lubos Rosa. He's got a bunch of flies out, but that rock chick or whatever. So it's just CDC essentially wrapped around it, and it's kind of big and bushy. Grand credit, I don't care where it is. They come rocketing out for that thing. And you can fish a dead drift, but it's way better stripped. And the Czech guys really think a trout is easy to catch, even when they're hard, because they think they're much more reaction oriented. We skew dead drift, they skew movement. So when a fish is really difficult, sometimes just changing your presentation. But yeah, so just back to like with difficult fish, like if it really gets difficult, kind of the fundamentals still matter. Don't spook them. Think about fishing in weird places, and then if the regular stuff doesn't work, don't be afraid of big changes. In my mind, you're trying to trigger a non-feeding response or something that they just haven't seen of, especially if it's a pressure situation. But everybody goes small in pressure. Sometimes big and weird, to your point, is a good one. And it's also fun just to try. Then if you don't catch anything, you can just say, well, that was kind of stupid anyways. You don't feel so bad. Tippet diameter, I think sometimes that gets a little too much press, if you want my opinion. But small, you can go smaller and smaller. The other one is take the shine off. So if somebody said really, really clear water, if it's really, really clear water, the tippet shine can make a difference. I actually think thinner tippet drifts the fly better. So you actually just get a better presentation. And so maybe they're so pressure there, this happens in the States, and I'm saying you've probably all been in some of those heavily fished fisheries. They get pretty in tune to drag. Like that's not stuff that the wind's been pulled, that we've been BS'd. So that thinner tippet just gives you a better presentation. So somebody was actually in Spain. We were surprised in Spain that we started on 7x tippet. We thought, oh, we got to go super small. And our guide was right. Nope, not now. On day 5, you will. And we had to, but he right at the gates, like, these aren't pressured fish. Yeah, they're Spanish fish, but they haven't been pressured. And then right away, they started to get really, really in tune with whether it be the drift or whatever the hell it was. It definitely made a difference. So tippet can matter. It just don't like live and die by all, like a lot of people say, well, heavily pressured fish, tippet solves all problems. All these European guys who catch, they're just using super light tippets. Not true. They will adjust it, and it is not the way they're solving all the world's problems, but it can make a difference. The other one is just angles. The bass guys know this better than anybody. They'll go through, fish a dock, they think a fish is there, the fish are off. They'll go fish it from, the pro bass guys go fish it from a different angle. They'll go back and flip it this way, do this. Sometimes angles, so back to, here, quote a Czech guy, if he's catching fish, he'll in his good spots, is not technically a great difficult fish, but okay, I caught a bunch of fish and he thinks there's more fish in there, he'll just go to the other side of the river and fish it that way. And he's totally right. You'll pick up tons of fish. You can go back through the same things from the same side 3 times, catch nothing, go to the other side, bang, 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 bang. You're just fishing it from a different angle. 100%, your fly just, I don't know what it is. It comes at a different angle, they see it differently. You just naturally play the currents differently. A lot of people do not switch sides of the river. So if you're having trouble catching fish and you always go up that same side, like we all go up the same side of the credit, anybody fishing from the other side can make a difference. The conditions changing all the time. I mean, again, so I pay a lot of attention to this because it's in my head, whether it gives me confidence or not, is, okay, let's take away that people just pounded the water. So sun, one that I didn't pay enough attention, we were talking about steelhead fishing, and it's one that over the last few years I paid a lot more attention. If the sun's in the fish's eyes, they can't see your fly as well. And it's totally true. Like we were told, I think we've all read the books, oh, where's your shadow, blah, blah, blah. Where's the sun? And if it's a sunny day and there's not high trees, if if the fish is, they're looking upriver, they don't have eyelids and they're staring right into the sun where you're trying to, it's really hard to catch them sometimes. So I might I'd come back to that spot, find a spot that, the fish, the edge of the shadows, they probably moved over there because of the sun, but we can put a lot on ourselves that's actually just, it's really, really sunny. So adapting to sun is hard. I know we all know that, but think about where the sun is in relation to the actual fish, not always just us. Every fly fishing book I've ever read is in relation to us, the angler. Try not to spook the fish. More important where it is in relation to the actual fish. Talk to from Joe Humphreys is famous for, you can't catch him one side, he'll cast on the other side of the fish, it'll move away from the sun, take the fly.
Hey Ian, how about the effects of barometric pressure changes?
Huge. So Ian, James, and I we would have told anybody. I'm a firm believer in barometric pressure affecting the fish. I mean, I like that a lot of fisheries biologists agree now. The best is stable. We all know if a storm comes in, falling barometric pressure will turn them on for a little bit, and then post-frontal conditions, as stating the total obvious, are super, super difficult. So as much so I've talked to people who have, if you talk to people in a hatchery, in post-frontal conditions, you can throw pellets in the water and they won't eat. So it's just following right through. So what I do with that is go, okay, so we talk difficult fish, those are difficult fish. They don't feel in a river more than a lake, because a lake, in my mind, they can normalize their barometric pressure by going deeper. In a river, they just sulk on the bottom. So right away, you're like, okay, pressure is all over the map. Fish are, what do you get on top of it? Sun and wind on top of it. So the conditions aren't great, but they're going to be on the bottom. They're not feeling good. This is where a lot of these techniques come out going, okay, it's not eating. The fish aren't eating. They might turn on for a half an hour here or something there. I can wait that out, or I can start, okay, this is where you get them. Like I've done better on a big streamer. or something. So now I'm gonna try what's a genetic response? Okay, let me get you actually to take so I gotta put a big jig fly in front of it. I'm gonna try something something really like a giant mop fly or something that's going to be out of the ordinary, that's going to make you have a reaction to it. This is the time to pull your big streamers for me. Maybe not as fast though, right in their face, but you're going to get a reaction strike to it. So knowing the conditions and paying attention. The other one is water temperature, right? So what is the water temperature? I'll state the obvious: big difference at 40 degrees than 61 degrees. So if you're keeping track of water temperature, the ultimate temperature for a brown trout is like 60, 61. Rainbow is like 58, and a brook trout is 55. If you put your finger on it. Now, anything in the 50s, we all know the fish are active like crazy. But so if the water temperature is good, like I can't buy a fish, and a barometric, okay, maybe trying to feed them food is not the way to go. Bring out your clown fly, bring out your interesting flies, try stripping a dry fly, try jigging a nymph, try to, that's in your head. So you're not, you're actually using your head on the conditions to adapt to it. It's not a fishing pressure situation. It's a fish are off situation. We were just talking about that with steelhead. I firmly believe there's sometimes you just cannot catch them. Like they're just, the only way you're going to catch them is some type of reaction bite, or just put in the work and find one fish. But that's
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to ask, does that temperature scale hold true for steelhead as well?
Yeah, if you get like the big cutoff for me is if we want to turn into a steelhead is 38 degrees. Okay. So I completely changed my tactics after 38 degrees. So 38 degrees, they turn into wintering. They go into slower water, deeper, slower waters. This is where the pinners start to rip it up, because they're fishing effectively in slow water with, a lot of times roe and stuff like that. So, and my flies, if I'm swinging a fly, they get big and stupid. Like, so the best steelhead fly there is, in my opinion, at under 38 degrees is a grapefruit head leech. It's a Kevin Feenstra pattern. Look it up. He puts a half a pound of flash abuo on it. He puts a big pink head and a chartreuse head, and it's about the size of a rapala. And you can catch fish through the winter on that thing. But why? Because it's a reaction take. That fly sucks when it's warm.
What's the name of that fly again, Ian?
Grapefruit, like the fruit, head leech. You're welcome. I just gave you one of the best steelhead flies there are in cold water. And you're going to look at it, you're like, and what a mistake everyone makes, they put too little flash on it. It's like, it's ridiculous. When you see it, it's ridiculous.
Oh yeah, it's a big gaudy.
Yeah, and it crushes on the Maitland, on the Saugeen, on little. I don't fish the big head as much, but I guarantee if you wanted to swing on when it's really cold. But so Kevin Feenstra is one of the best steelhead guys I think that exists, and he is dead under 38 degrees, and he is 100%. Paying attention to the water conditions, it just gives you a better game plan if it's off, right? So we talked about before, like I think when I did a presentation, I may change my pacing, the fish will be a bit off, but when they're really difficult, has there been a big cold snap? Okay, we all know the fish are off. Like that is tough to catch them just doing things the right way. So it's much more of a reaction bite. Totally different than the 60 degrees, I gotta eat, my metabolism is high, but I am sick and tired of people wading through this river. That's a different difficult fish. Mm-hmm. Or the weary brown trout that you can see in clear water that you can see eating, but you can't figure out what it is. So I think the last one would be, that kind of fish. So we talked about, okay, we've pressured through the water. Think about them in different spots, do that stuff. The weather sucks. Pay attention to why does it suck? Is it the sun? Okay, where would a fish be in the sun, and then kind of adapt to it, different sides, stuff like that. Water temperature, what temperature is it? So do they have the metabolism high or not? Do they have to eat? If it's cold, they might turn on for an hour. You might just say, hey, this isn't necessarily a difficult fish. I'm going to hit my peak in the afternoon, right? Like, okay, it's been cold all day. my window is probably 1 to 3 degrees. I'm going to make sure that's when they're probably going to eat. I'm going to fish, as a tactic it would be I'm going to fish gaudy stuff or weird stuff up until I think that water temperature's at peak, because I think it's a water temperature game that they're making it difficult. Then I switch to what they would actually eat, fish that, go back to the stupid stuff. That would be may or may not work, but that's the way I think about trying to catch them in a water, conditions are all over the place. Stuff like that's why you can catch them on a cigarette butt when the pressure is dropping initially, and then the day after they were feeding up for that. So they're done feeding. That's done. I think the hardest one kind of can be the classic, which is the feeding fish that you can't catch, right? Those are the ones where I always find it the most interesting. So I thought just a couple examples on that. So if it's a dry fly, if it's a nymphing, you can see it actually taking flies off the surface. The two fun, it does work, for what it's worth, the Spanish scale down their tippet before they change flies. So there's a great story of David Arkai, who's one of the top anglers in the world, definitely one of the best dry fly anglers in Colorado, training for the Worlds. There's a pot of rainbows feeding, and the guy says they're going to go fish for them. It's like, oh, nobody can catch those. And he famously, just telling me, he said, the whole Spanish team, what do you mean nobody can catch those? Nobody can catch those fish. Well, it's a feeding fish. And so the way he explained it to me was, they made a cast with 7X, nothing, 8X, a couple, 9X, they take it every time, but they break them off. Okay, so 8X they'll eat half the time. And that was, those fish were that conditioned into micro drag. My natural would have been changing flies every time. So on a dry fly fish, make sure you're not getting micro drag. That's the hardest one. And a lot of times we see them eating something you can't see. So for all the fun it's worth, go small, and then take that off and put like a size 12 caddis over it or something. Something they've been conditioned to that you just can't help it yourself, right? So you could argue you're giving up or you're cheating. If you care about that, you care a lot more than I do. But some people don't want to do that. Okay, gotta figure out exactly that. And by the way, it's probably ants. By the way, 90% of the time when you can't figure out what the hell they're eating, try an ant pattern. Anybody taking notes, put that down. Ant pattern.
Do they take the red ants, Ian? Because those burn like hell. I mean, I always thought they didn't eat the red ants. Am I wrong about that?
I hope they eat red ants because I hate those things. But
aren't they
horrible? I have no idea. Yeah. I just fish a black ant. I have no idea.
Black ant? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, they love a cinnamon ant. But I don't overthink it. I hate tying ant patterns. I have they're not hard to tie. But if I have a next time for me that I work on the most is I forget about ants too much. So a difficult dry fly fish that you can see feeding and you can't tell what it's eating could be midges, but they love ants for sure. The other one would be, what's that?
They're like how small? Because I mean the natural ants on the credit are like super tiny, right? But
yeah.
Are you going that small with ant patterns?
I like an 18, 20.
Yeah. Okay.
Is that super small?
I mean, I try not to go below 16 most of the time.
Oh, okay. Then but you can, again, that coffee bean, slap a beetle. Mm-hmm. But do not forget about a size, you see, again, trick from Ian James. Every time you get to the river, I should have said this, he'll hit the bushes and stuff. He used to hit the bushes and stuff and just see what flies out. And Bryce says, yep, he sure did. Yeah. So, that is an amazing trick. Just, okay, I saw a big fly, a little fly. You're like, okay, all right. Put that in the memory banks. Okay, that fish is, it's boom, boom, boom. A nicely drifted caddis comes over. I see that. I know it's food. It might refuse it, but a lot of times it'll take it. And then there's a guy named Jeremy Lucas in England who I don't think he competes anymore, but he's their dry fly river guru, and he's friggin' good. And so he is convinced you only need one dry fly to catch a brown trout, and he may be right. So it's called a plume tip. I think I've tied it before. It's online. He ties this with ostrich or a body. Ian James would love this fly too. I use a pheasant tail, and he puts a CDC kind of shuttlecock wing on it. The key of that fly, if you're ever tying it, is the angle. It has to go 45 degrees, but it hangs the body in the film. He ties it in about an 18, a 16, and a 18, 16. I think, does he go 20, 18, 16? Maybe. He might go 20, 18, 16, or call it 18, 16, 14, but 14 looks a bit big. He will just scale that down, and he's fished all over the world, and he's pretty damn close that you just scale that down, and if you have a brown trout in slow water, they'll probably eat a plume tip. They just probably will. They do. It just works. I think because it hangs in the film, it's like an emerger. I don't know. They eat it. So those brown trout in slow water, that's a good take. And then if you had one feeding in front of you, and I haven't had one in years. We had a monster brown trout on the Grand. We spent 3 hours on this thing. Like, I couldn't believe it. Like, it just wouldn't. It was like taking dries. We tried. No, right? I could see it. It's huge. Eating nymphs, actively feeding. Could I catch it? Nope. So we finally hooked it on. It was actually an Ian James one, like his little brass hasp, but the one he tied with it just with thread, and it was a size 22. Right. So we just kept scaling. That took 3 hours. We tried. Big, small, nothing. So that thing just wanted midges. Like, so but I must have went through every fly I had. That was the last thing I tried. And then we lost it, but at least we hooked it. So none of these tricks work. And that was really hard because it was feeding. It was a feeding fish. That was the ones that actually once in a while will test you. That's probably what we love about fly fishing. I probably should have changed the tippet a bit more with the client, but we had to balance kind of ability to actually drift the fly effectively in such a small fly. So the French guys that really like sight fishing, they're very, very concerned where the tippet is. So if you really want to get advanced, you want to do your PhD in fly fishing, they make sure to never, you ready for this? So I'm still wrapping my head around it. So in really clear water, when a fish is upstream, if you're on, we'll say, the fish is facing upstream, we're on the left-hand side to it, they always cast the fly over the fish and hold the leader over the fish. So when it turns, it doesn't see the leader first.
It was impressive to watch Bertrand do that out west this year.
Yeah, so you were with Bertrand. That's from Bertrand, so you watched it. He believes in it, eh?
Insane.
Yeah.
I sat for 4 hours and just watched because it was insane. Like,
yeah. So like a couple things you would apply. So the French Bertrand, who don't know who he is, he's a world champion who has a record for the most fish caught in any session. I think it was like 100 or something like that. And he caught a fish on every cast because he was sight fishing them. He's one of the best sight fishermen in the world. But in France, he says he's a guide. He goes, I don't take people to catch fish. I take them to show them fish. They can never catch them. He's like, they always spook them. And then because there's very low clear water, their flies aren't crazy, just a pheasant tail, something like that. They're very big on the plop, making sure that's right. But they're convinced if the fish turns and sees a little bit of tippet, that's how spooky they're actually they hold the tippet on the other side so it turns away and doesn't see the angler as well. So they don't want in any way the fish to turn and see you in any way, shape, or form, so they hold it, they cast on the other side. That's pretty crazy. But that's
sorry. Just trying to understand that. That's nymphing?
Yeah.
Mauro, and they watch for the fish to dart at something, and when it stops or they see the actual mouth open, they set the hook.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
Is this that no cider technique that's a really long leader technique?
Yep.
For
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I know.
Yeah. So he's not. So he's putting slack in it because he's just sight fishing, and I mean we'll go down a rabbit. Look, I said I'll go down any rabbit hole you want. You'll go down a rabbit hole here. So he's pushing slack into the leader and judging the sink rate of it, and he's just there's no cider because you're watching the fish, but
right.
that that's for your once in a blue moon. You've come across the fish sitting there. It's not my go-to, but I guess it's going to have to be.
Okay, sorry. So now, okay, I'm a little bit more aware of what you're saying. So can you explain again where he wants the leader in that case?
He never wants the leader on the side he is of the fish, so it'll turn and either see the leader or him. So he puts it on the other side, so at least turns away and doesn't see him. So he's like, he is, if he can minimize it, he just wants it to see.
So he's making sure that the fly lands on the far side of the fish
all the time,
drifting by.
Yeah.
Oh, understood.
And then he almost in line with the fish. Then he holds the rod over so that like the line is very far away from the fish.
Got
as it falls, and then he never wants it to turn towards him ever.
Got it.
So back to, but what is he most focused on? Spooking them.
Got it.
And so so when you wade there, like we didn't talk about it, if you're pushing water, like that, like all that stuff, like that, he doesn't really talk about the nymph. He asks what the nymphs. Who cares about the nymphs? You spook them when they turn. So that I've never heard that before. It all makes sense. They think they have the most difficult fish in the world. So they might be right. Super low, clear, beyond spooky. So they're number one, and that's why they catch fish the most. That's why I started with it. Is they're the most focused on not spooking the fish in the first place. It's the number one for sure.
Okay, so now the image I have in my head there is, maybe this is a rabbit hole, but are they worried about? Because all I can picture is sun angle in this whole equation.
Yeah, they get pretty.
Or do you have no choice on that anyway? Basically.
Well, and their rivers are a lot of like this is there are a lot of them where he fishes is like not kind of mountainous, like so it's a lot of canyon. Like the sun is less of a factor as much as it is them seeing you. And to me, if I'm not moving, I never really worry about it. And so he's obsessed with it on that side, clearly, because Marco went and fish. I was supposed to go out there in Alberta and fish with him as well, but I was told that he's pretty big on that stuff.
But also something you touched on earlier, Ian, also watching him on the bank as often as he could be.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And like with tall grass around him, mm-hmm. and really minimizing any, to your point of how wary he is about spooking fish, or I guess the French are in general. Mm-hmm. The approach was half of the learning to watch.
Yeah, like Joe Humphreys said, it best is stalking a gray squirrel. I mean, that's the best way you explain it.
Yeah.
If you're stalking a squirrel, how would you act? And I think we just get used to it. I am guilty as anybody. Like I'll go down credit. I'm like, I am sloppy. I'm like, the Grand, I take way too many liberties because I just sometimes don't care. But if you really get serious, you put knee pads maybe under your waders so you don't look like you, or wear them outside of your waders. But if I tell people get knee pads because you're more willing to just take a knee, lowering your profile. Those guys are obsessed with that stuff. And so they're the best at catching fish in the difficult conditions, and they are the most focused on spooking them. And then it's like the water is lava. They never want to be in the water. They don't even need waders. They never want to be in the water unless they absolutely have to. So that's a tip we can take away. And then they're very careful on the bank too, and how far back they are. In Spain, watching the French, like when I say they're out of the water, they're like 5 feet back sometimes. They don't go near the damn water. They act like they're just convinced. And then so why do there's your number one for pressured fish and difficult fish is don't spook them in the first place. That can go a long way. And just, don't have to go over the board, but just maybe challenge yourself a little bit to pay attention to it. You'll probably catch a few more. Especially when people are sloppy, they'll reset pretty fast. Fish got to eat sometime. So you take that out and then try some of those other techniques like the plop. Not a lot of people think of the bead hitting the water. That can make a big difference. So that's one. The changing of the dry flies. Don't be afraid of big. Everybody goes small. I love small too. Don't forget about the ant. Be the other one. and then the hot spots on the flies, or something dramatically different. Those are kind of fundamentals that people don't really do very often. And again, we're talking difficult fish. Always go with your standards, but that staying out of the water is going to catch you more fish all the time.
Do you fish ants here often?
Yeah. Not as much as I should. That's my mistake.
Cool.
Yeah, I'll use it just because Bryce is here. I keep using Ian James stories, but I learned a lot from him. So another time, so this was one. There's a guy who's no longer with us. He passed away, but Ian was guiding, I was guiding. We couldn't catch him like on the Grand, and we're very, very, very frustrating. If you remember Timmer, those who knew Tim from the Grand, he was killing them, just slaughtering them, and we tried everything, and it was frickin' ants. It was like, so that's the one I stick in my head going, man, like, you know, it's unbelievable how much that made a difference. There's another fly I should say too that is the F fly. I know if you don't know what an F fly is, it's just like thread on a hook with fancy ones have a body, but really, really small F flies, you're crazy not to have those in your box. And when I say small, 22s and 20s. Again, extreme, both sides. Right? So I like 14s and 16s 90% of the time. It's probably all you need. Maybe I'll drift into an 18, but don't be like, if you're going to tie a 22, just put thread on it's small, thread on a hook, and a little bit of CDC.
When we're talking about ants,
tied a lot of those. Yep.
We're talking about ants. We're talking about those foam floating ones. Or,
no. No, none of those. Not West Coast throw cigarette butt ants. No, just two dubbing balls and a little bit of hackle in the middle.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, and they're really, some people do them with seal's fur because they float. They're hard to see. They say, but the other good news is if you drown an ant, it works just as well. Like, you know, a drowned ant, no problem. Yeah. By the way, another one, grasshoppers, like Ian James trick. He used to fish a drowned grasshopper on the Grand a lot. Weird. Worked a lot. You know why? Because it was weird. Because the stuff sinks, right? So we gave this lady Brenda a bunch of these beautiful F flies. You know, she was out fishing us, and she's like, "That was one of the best nymphs you ever gave me." She put a split shot in front of it, and we were like, "What?" Like it was a dry fly, but
I think I know Brenda.
Yeah, ask Brenda about when she was fishing F flies on like under split shot. The F fly, simple, really small, outside of that plume tip. If there's a fly to have, I've got New Zealand when you couldn't catch a fish, put that on, they'll just eat it. It's little tiny, easy to have. Once in a while I'll try to drift on it, but you'd be surprised that can save the day. I don't really go past a 20. 22 is getting a little ridiculous. 22s, that's kind of where I draw the line, but have a few in your box. If in, like little joke we said, break glass, can't catch them, try stupid small. No, okay, let me try a 12. Let me try a 10. Oh, let me let me just drift this size 4 stimulator through here a couple times. All of a sudden, boom, okay, I wasn't in the mood to move for a size 22 because I wasn't feeding. Should have used that when I was nymphing it, or I was feeding, you couldn't catch me. Nothing happening. You can fish a streamer you can fish a dry fly like a streamer. Just go big and put it in weird places, dead drift it, strip it, see what happens. Worst case, you weren't going to catch anything anyways. So you'd be surprised how many times that'll kind of change your luck on stuff like that. And then the other one is ultra natural behind someone who's doing something aggressive. So for saying, somebody said again, fishing behind somebody, you want a little trick from competition fishing, watch how they're fishing. How good are they? Where are they fishing? And what are they doing? So if they're pulling streamers, I'm going behind like with a no-CM nymph, something like that, fished really, really fine and far off. If they're nymphing really, really good, I can do that behind them, or I'm going to fish every spot they didn't because they fished that really, really well, or I'll try something completely different than what they're doing. So you can kind of watch people in front of you to see what's working and what's not, depending on their level of skill. And if they're not good and they're splashing like they are putting the fish down, you need to either get in front of them or give that fish a ton of time reset because they're sloppy waiting, they're running through the holes, all that kind of stuff. They're just making it almost, not uncatchable, but you're going to have to wait 20 minutes behind them to fish. And that's just using your head, right?
And I have kind of a 101 question. So when you're mixing it up and you're sometimes nymphing and sometimes throwing dry flies and sometimes throwing streamers, are you doing that on one rod? Like, how do you think about your setup if you're going to really mix it up?
I tend to bring 2 rods. So if you know what I do, there's 2 ways to do both, but I always so I'm getting a little ridiculous, and sometimes I'll do a streamer rod, but I might as well just get a golf bag and start walking around with that. But I like having a nymph rod and a dry fly rod, and I put one in my waders, like in the bib in the front of my waders, to kind of it sticking up to the side. That I don't like when it's really, really sunny and stuff like that, because it's causing a shadow. So sometimes there's a clip you can put on your belt. It's like an Oros or something like that. Little clip, but it can be a real pain in the ass. So some people like more the kind of a hybrid leader, like it's a Euro/nymphing leader. I find I just can't do it well enough, the presentation. So I'll just switch between dry fly rod and a nymphing. So I use an 18-foot dry fly leader, like a Spanish style, and then I use a pretty thin leader for me. 0.14 is probably kind of my standard go-to for a nymph leader. But that allows me to fish far away. I don't have sag. So a heavy leader will make it sag, and I'll try to avoid. I have no problem with suspension devices, anything like that. I just don't like them when the conditions are really, if there's spooky fish. I don't like the indicator flopping around. I don't like it splatting on the water. I don't like any of that. So I'll use those New Zealand, if I have to use it. Those New Zealand indicators are way better. Or a yarn, like what we did in the old days, the yarn indicators, and that's why they use them in New Zealand, because they're good with spooky fish. And dry dropper, if you're allowed to.
Yeah. Sorry, when you tie a dry dropper, are you tying off the bend, or are you doing you're doing a dropper off the main line, and then your nymph is basically your point fly?
Yeah, I do a dropper off the main line. Okay. Nothing wrong with New Zealand style. I just don't do it because I can't fish in competition. I also, if a fish takes the dry, they feel that tippet. I don't like the tippet on the hook. And I've changed how I fish dry dropper. Like I used to hold it like off the Euro rig, like you almost have, this is the dropper. I keep that triangle, like this would be, this is the dropper, this is the main line. And this would be water. You kind of hold it like that. Is what what we learned in Spain was just drop it right on the water. It's even easier. Like just drop your rod and let it just drift, because they have trouble sometimes taking the dry fly. So when they're eating, so if they're not taking the dry fly, it's the wind or some difficult condition, you just want it to set the hook, then you can do that. But the little tip they showed us, which was just, put all your tippet, keep your leader off, but keep your tippet in the water. It's actually easier. And you have thin tippet, you get these way better dry fly drifts, and they can actually take the fly. Your hookup rate goes through the roof. So it's not the way the Americans do it. Not the Americans are doing wrong. That's just the way they do it in Europe, and it was good. With tiny beads though, like we were using really like 2 mil beads, size 18 hook. And the other one on dry dropper, they use just regular dry flies. They don't have they don't use heavy flies underneath it, so they're just using. They don't have any special flies for a dry dropper. None. Same flies. They just find one that hold the bead up. So if they don't have some crazy caddis packed with deer hair, because their flies aren't that heavy. So they keep it very, very natural. I'm not sure it's difficult fish, but difficult conditions. Dirty water. So really, really dirty water can be, it makes the fish difficult. Anybody got any tactics they'd share for dirty water?
Big streamers.
Big streamers.
Yeah, that's like my standard operating procedure. Is
I was gonna say that's but I could say like So
no, I don't bother in clear water very much, to be honest.
Yeah.
But if it's dirty water, that's my because that happens so infrequently, unfortunately. They get dirty water. I kind of wait for those days, and that's
Yeah.
high and dirty, I'm throwing the streamer because I maybe get 2 of those days a year now. So
If it's
Yeah.
high dirty water, it can push the fish to the shore. So it's a little
Yep.
closer to the shore, a little bit more of a silhouette, big body, darker body.
Yep.
Big and noisy, pushing lots of water.
Yeah, and then the other one is is fishing the same little spot 10 times more thoroughly than you would. So if you find anything that has a little, like I agree, they get pushed to the bank, because again, in competition, sometimes we have to fish where it's halfway blown out, and you're like, okay, I would never, to your point, I wouldn't fish in it, but sometimes we end up fishing it. It is difficult fish to catch. Don't be afraid of just going, okay, there's a little pocket of clearer water here. The fish are more likely to be here, and just stay in that spot and work it with a whole bunch of different things you just said, versus trying to cover all the water like you would normally. That's a way to eke out a couple fish too. George Daniel historically there's a competition in Pennsylvania, and it got blown out over the banks and everybody blanked. He caught like 4. He's like, I never moved. I stayed in the same spot. I just fished it the whole 3 hours. And because he's like, that's the highest probability of the fish. Those fish are off, but and it was up on a grass into a park. Like it was way over the bank. So he was fishing on the walking path, so he was using his head. Smart. Fish aren't where they're always going to be. And then he just stayed in one spot and said, okay, I know they're going to be tough. 1 or 2 is going to make all the difference. And those are days we don't necessarily pleasure fish, but if you find yourself in that situation, it's using everything we talked about. Spooking them, not an issue. Now it's just, okay, how am I going to actually eke one out here? Probably just stay in one spot or a very, very small area, because hopefully the fish are condensed. And what's the most likely feeding spot for a fish in those? And that's how I would think about a fish in that type of situation. Because sometimes you get stuck in those. Maybe on a fishing trip, it's blown out. You want to go fishing anyways. That's a way to think about it. The streamers, jigging a streamer slow can be really, really good. Nymphs can be good. Put the dries away, probably not going to work.
Yeah, probably not dries. Yeah.
No
and,
problem.
and any bead colors or colors in general that are better in dirty water?
Silver, for me.
Okay.
Yeah, you can try the hot beads, but I agree with black. I like black and silver together in that situation. Maybe with a little bit of flash. Bigger than they normally would be, although they can see better than you think. So the one thing is, I'm trying to wrap my head, you don't have to go crazy, but also what will drift slow as well. So a perdigon, for example, drifts slower than a hackled nymph. So another thing with difficult fish we didn't talk about would be your drift speed. So back to changes. I said changing and big changes in flies. Don't be afraid to change from a perdigon if you don't like. That's a epoxy nymph that actually drifts really, really slow. Whereas a hackled fly is going to actually drift faster. Even if you get it down, it just catches more water. So there's actually subtle drift speeds that can make a difference as well. Again, so you could say, okay, I want to slow it down. Let me try something with some hackle. Like, do they take it because there's hackle, or do they take it because it actually drifted different? But things that, again, that's a dramatic change to me. You're changing the actual hydrodynamics of your fly. You're not going, I'm going to try 3 different colors of perdigon. So again, don't be afraid of big or substantial changes when you're doing that.
Ian, how do you think about how much time to spend in a spot versus moving on to the next spot? Like, obviously, if the fish are in a negative mood, you've talked about changing it all up, but also how quickly do you change water? Like, I've seen some people like a pool and fish it for hours on end, even if they're not watching a big rising brown trout. How do you think about that trade-off between fishing the water you're in thoroughly and getting on and covering the ground?
So yeah, and so my opportunity, I'll just straight up, is to slow down a little bit. So I tend to cover the water fast. I don't want to say fast because I'm running through it, but so the variables would be, first of all, would be temperature. So if it's prime time, like the fish are active, they should be active. So I call it pacing. Yeah, so the pacing piece matters. That's based on, I think we all know, like if it's fishing well, I'm going to keep moving. a lot faster. How good is your drift? So I'll kind of lean toward watching like the top guys in the world. They move like subtly fast, right? So they're just so, what they are is the word is efficient. So they are putting a good drift, 1 or 2 through each spot and moving. They don't really, lose any sleep over it. They'll just keep moving and covering water. They won't stop and change 50 flies. They'll just keep moving for and kind of, in their mind, try to figure out where the fish are. That's because they're putting really good drifts through. So I will adjust my pacing on kind of water temperature and conditions, density of fish. That makes a big difference. And then stocked or wild. If they're stocked trout, there's a lot of them. I'm just going to cover water faster. But what I'm trying to do is slow down a little bit, because sometimes I'm moving. My learning this year was fishing with some other people is they were catching fish behind me because I was moving too fast. So there's no perfect answer to that one, but that's how I kind of think about it. But I definitely don't grow moss. Like I can't just sit in one spot and keep working it over and over and over and over and over again. I'll go, okay, I'll just move to a different spot. I'll just keep moving and keep always trying to find if it's a tough day, try to find a fish that'll play a player of a fish. How good am I fishing is really the question. How good are my presentations? And then adapting from there. And then going, okay, that I covered some really good water. I fished it well. I didn't catch a damn fish. Complete change. Now we're going to start messing about, so it does matter like how well it's kind of fishing. Like you can judge those rivers, right? Or like when you get halfway up the Caledon, you usually catch 5 fish and you're like, I've caught none. Am I fishing crappy? No. I'm either going to slow down, change some things, or start fishing some different waters and stuff like that. But there's no perfect answer to that one. But that's how I kind of think about how faster I'm going to move. Also think of water you can replicate, right? So, okay, they're in the riffles. Then I'll start moving faster through slow water to get to the riffles, and then pick apart the riffles, stuff like that. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of how I think about it.
Thank you.
Do the soft hackle wet flies see any competitive application?
Yeah. They still have their day
For the pressured fish?
Yeah, actually really good for little fish. The thing I don't like about soft hackle or swinging flies in that stuff is you're above them. And so you're swinging downstream. So your hookup ratio and landing them is you're pulling them upstream. So you hook a lot, but like we all know, swinging flies, it can be not as efficient. But I mean, the same a lifting fly, right? So it genetic response, like the Lessing ring lift or whatever they call that, just lifting the fly. A swung fly can definitely catch fish for sure.
Ian
and that's a change of angle.
Ian and I would make out like bandits with partridge and orange and yellow.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, and then even the black one too, right? So partridge orange, partridge and yellow, and then we were doing it in New Zealand. We were doing it in competitions. One trick that got this from Colin Huff. If you don't know him, he's a very good, like one of the best anglers in Canada or across the world. Which was, instead of the classic hold your line up, do the called the British, where you have that nice arc in your line and it swings across. We were setting the drag really loose and then not holding the line and swinging it through, and the fish taking it pulls drag. It's a little fish, but your hookup ratio is really, really good. So you look ridiculous. It's like zzz, then it's a little 12-inch pound trout. So you strip it in. But the one thing I've changed, because I find that works, especially if you're on a Euro rig or some tight line rig, it doesn't fish as well. You just fish it tight line and make sure your drag set really loose, and just don't hold the line, and you'll be amazed how many fish you hook. So I'm with you.
Why is that? You gotta give them the ability to run with it. They gotta be able
to turn, to inhale it. They don't bite. They try to inhale. So what we're doing with the fly line, the old way, is a nice big sag, so you'd see the line straighten. And so, but sometimes the fish are little and they can't actually. It's still a lot of weight for them to inhale. So you hook a lot up, but you get a lot of plucks.
Right.
If you're tight to it, and what I don't like being as tight to with the Euro line, because when they pluck it, they can't. There's no stretch. So that light, it's a little. Well, it sounds cool, but it's ridiculous because you have some small fish. But it does really increase your hookup ratios. And I've been using it for steel. By the way, swinging for steelhead also good to set your drag the right way. Everybody leaves that loop. The other thing you do is just set your drag to the medium loose, and then they turn and they lock up a lot. Like it's because they can take it and turn. There's no
just like my hook set, right, Ian?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Marco had a hook set problem when we were out of my boat. That's for the next time you invite me back. Swinging for steelhead. Don't do that. Hey, but you caught the last one, right? So that's all.
I did.
Yeah, and it was a nice one. Yeah.
On the soft tackle, I was going to mention. I think you introduced me to this one, Ian. The Lubos Rosa thread jig nymph or something.
Right, thread nymph. Yeah.
That's I've kind of stopped with the hare's ear. That's now my new hare's ear.
Oh, you're cheating on the hare's ear. All right.
Yeah. It's now pheasant tail and thread jig.
Here's the thread nymph, it's a check fly. There's about 20 different versions of it. That fish, that is of world level competitors. It's in everybody's box. It's everybody's one of their top favorite flies. Yeah, the pheasant, along with the pheasant tail and hare's ear. That thread nymph is good. It's kind of like a hare's ear with some CDC or some partridge hackle, depending on which version you tie. And it's either got Glow Bright number 5 or pink, I think Glow Bright number 2, or a mix of the two, Raptor. That'll catch fish anywhere in the world. Yeah. I don't know why. It just does. They love it. They love it. So it should be in everybody's box. If you don't have one, I'm not sure it's always called a thread nymph, but again, look at it. I think we call it a thread nymph, but that's. I think
he calls it a thread jig or something like that.
Yeah. And then the Czech guys everybody loves that fly. So so those are kind of your standard ones, and then everybody has the ones we talked about when you get into the weird stuff. Don't forget about ants. Have really, really tiny dries. Have some big stuff. It's not rocket science, but that's the stuff I would do. Those plume tips as well. So if you haven't fished a plume tip, suggest. They're a classic looking fly. Look it up, tie it. It's really, really good. It is a really, really good, difficult fish fly when they're feeding. It's not a searching pattern, but if we've all seen those flat water, the fish just eating. Jeremy Lucas is not far off that. In his mind, it's the only. He thinks he's whittled it down to one dry fly, and then he's obsessed with he was one of the original guys. His thing is funny. He fishes a dry fly kind of on just almost like a leader. I think he calls it long line or something. I don't know, leader to hand. And he fishes a dry fly on a long leader, no fly line. And he's really, really good with it, but he gets amazing drift. So he is convinced too that you don't spook a fish. He's convinced that the fly line coming off is the reason you don't catch fish in a dry fly, because you put them down. Back to what we said, you make the fishing more difficult than it needs to. The Spanish guys just went for a 20-foot leader. So it's kind of both in the same thing. But if you ever want to check out Jeremy Lucas's stuff, it's interesting and he's good. It's a little different.
You on the upstream versus, let's say, not so much downstream, but let's say perpendicular, like 90 degrees to the fish, right beside the fish. Is there like a rule of thumb that you have on, let's say, distance, or size of river, or how do you judge when you really need to be downstream of the fish versus I can kind of get away with block wading? And I don't know what the number is. Is it 30 feet? Like you can wade to within 30 feet beside them? Depends on the depth, of course, and clarity and all that stuff, and lots of factors. But do you have like a rough guideline that you follow? If you just took if you're using a 10-foot rod, so add another 10
you fish, 10-foot rod plus 10, so 20 feet away. That's kind of a standard. If I'm fishing closer than like 20 feet, I feel I'm pretty close. Now, as you said, super fast water right on the rod tip, check nymph 20 years ago style, that'll work. But I feel that kind of what's my standard, about 20 feet.
About 20 feet.
What do I feel more comfortable with? 30.
Yeah.
But you put,
that gets tougher to cast and drift and everything else, right?
Yeah, it depends. And if it's deep water, but that's where I feel pretty comfortable. Like I call it my working distance, where you everybody has their working distance. And then what I've started to adapt by fishing with a lot of the European guys at the top, their working distance I noticed was just a little bit farther away. And I thought they were being ridiculous. They kind of are when they come to our rivers when I fish with them here, but you can tell with where they come from, and lo and behold, they pull out a couple big fish. They catch a few more fish than you. So you're like, okay, like they didn't have to do that, but they did actually catch more or bigger. And there's a guide from Pennsylvania, John Stoynoff, who some could argue is like the godfather of what we do today. He fished. He's out of Pennsylvania. Quoting George Daniel again. George Daniel thinks best nymph fisherman he's ever seen, and he fished with Joe Humphreys. He was doing 11 12-foot rods. Never would fish a dry. Just been nymphing since like the 50s, and he used to use Maxima and fish a 12-foot rod. And he would never. A couple things. He loved fishing the Grand. He would never really walk in the water, and he would fish the other side. I always remember, because he would have his 12-foot rod, and he'd be fishing the other side from the one side, like you back to your perpendicular. And what was his favorite fly? The old LaFontaine sparkle pupa with a gold bead. Gold bead. Destroys on the Grand for some reason from him. That guy would catch more big fish than anybody I've ever seen on the Grand. And another lesson, he just didn't spook them, but he fished really far away. Really far away. Yeah. So
and that was with standard fly line? That wasn't cider?
No, he used all Maxima chameleon.
All Maxima? Wow.
Maxima, yeah, those old days. He was a master with it. Yeah. So he used to do something else with his little trick. When it was going, he'd do this too. He would, as it was going, he would just wiggle the fly, so it was dead drift but wiggling. That guy could clean it up. He was good.
Wow.
So again, he would do something subtly different, but he fished far away. Back to you, his working distance was far.
Huh.
Now he came from Pennsylvania, so there you go. And then the other option is you don't want to be far, lower your profile. So my question is, you take a knee or go a little bit lower, or you're shorter, you can get closer. James and I's problem was we were big, so depending on your height, but taking a knee, you can get closer. Like there's a guy, a couple guys in the American team, they're more crawl up to the fish guys. Man, they're right down on their hands and knees, like they're low. But in Spain, they weren't fishing far. They were just fishing crazy. Like they look like they're in trying to make the, they're at boot camp crawling underneath, like when they're making but man, like that guy, they what's his name? He was in my group. He was really doing well, and he was telling me he was on his hands and knees. Like he thought getting on a knee was too high, but he was fishing really close. But he was trying to creep up on them, right? Whereas the other thing is stay far away and be able to fish farther. But again, super focused on not spooking them. And we do spook more fish than we think, like for sure. And I've been lazy, and I know when I've had some bad days, it's because I've been over. You fish the same water, you get a little bit overconfidence, or you've been there, done that. You just don't fish. You don't pay attention to it. And I think I've got a bad habit of doing it on the credit, to be honest. So when I do step back, I catch more fish when I smarten up and fish a little bit farther. Not crazy, but I'm just saying a little bit more paying attention to that.
Yeah.
Hey, Ian.
Yep.
Most of our waters, as you're aware, we can only fish a single fly. In the case of being able to fish two flies and take some of the same topics we discussed, any guidance you'd give there?
Yeah, it's a good point. I'll leave that out. So one trick would be, if we fish a lot of two fly places, go down to one fly. But we fish a lot of one fly places. But so if you're in rivers where they fish a lot of 2 fly, you can try 1 fly for sure. But like to me, don't have the flies too close together. You get better drifts, but a lot of people put them close. You get better drifts. I just don't like 2 flies really close together, and don't have short droppers more than and if you want to know your weighting, if you're fishing downstream on a swing, so we're talking about swinging, this is the only time I'll do it. You have the heavier fly on the dropper. It's the only time ever. Never ever should you have the heaviest fly on the dropper, except for when you're swinging flies. The reason being, I think you all just figured out, your fly, your line is then tight to the top fly. The other one with the current is straightened out. So you're tight to both flies. So you've got contact with both. If you go upstream with that setup, don't do that. Like there's people who say, oh, I like the other one drifting naturally. That's slack. It's garbage. So if you're fishing upstream, the best setup is both beads the same weight, if you had to put your finger on it. If you're fishing perpendicular, the point fly or the bottom fly is the heaviest.
In tag length, typically 6 inches?
6 inches, a little longer than you think, like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Don't go, again, and can be annoying with it, tangling and stuff, but I asked David Archive, for what it's worth, when does he lose confidence? When he said when his dropper's short. That's the only time he doesn't like it. So for what it's worth, they're one of the best things. But don't go stupid long. But I pay attention to that. Don't use these little nub droppers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just about natural drift. But that little bead trick is a good one to remember. So swinging, heaviest on the top dropper, upstream, which is the most natural presentation and by far the hardest. That's why you can use lighter and the same, because you want the flies drifting in the same perpendicular across. It's better to have the heaviest one because it gets it down and it just drifts better. And then tippet diameter will adjust your sink rate accordingly. But yeah, and back to the difficult conditions, if you can really master fishing a nymph upstream effectively and almost close to straight upstream, you catch more for sure. You just don't spook them, you're farther behind them. It's the same reason. And you get a better. But it's way harder.
All right.
That's all I know. I'm out of stuff.
Great stuff.
That's it. That's all I got.
Excellent.
Everybody, I appreciate
Thanks
the
a
input
lot.
back. It's really fun to see everybody again.